Claire Bennett stood at the edge of Bay 7, her boots scuffed from weeks of travel across the outer rim stations. The auction hall buzzed with low chatter, the air thick with the smell of ozone and old metal. Around her, buyers in patch jackets and grease-stained gloves eyed the rows of derelict ships like vultures circling a carcass. Most were here for parts. Ion coils, navigation cores, maybe a salvageable reactor. Claire was no different. She needed a ship, cheap and fast, something to get her off this rock and back to the trade lanes before her credits ran dry. The auctioneer, a wiry man with a voice like grinding gears, tapped his datapad. Next lot, scrap designation Alpha 9. Former long hauler. Hull integrity questionable. Systems offline. Sold as is, no returns, no refunds. He paused for effect. Starting bid, 500 credits. A few half-hearted offers came in. 300, 400. Then silence. Claire raised her hand. 600. The room barely stirred. At that price, the ship was little more than floating junk. The auctioneer nodded. Sold. To the woman in the gray coat. 2 hours later, Claire floated through the dim interior of her new purchase. The ship was smaller than she expected. About 30 meters long with a narrow cockpit and a single cargo hold. Rust streaked the inner walls and the air tasted stale, laced with the faint tang of burnt wiring. She ran a gloved hand along the control panel. Most of the screens were dark. One flickered weakly, displaying a string of corrupted glyphs she did not recognize. She sighed. 600 credits. Probably worth half that in scrap. But it had a working oxygen recycler, and the thrusters looked intact. Maybe she could patch it up enough to reach Proxima Depot. That was all she needed. As she moved toward the rear compartment, a soft sound stopped her. Not mechanical. Not the groan of stressed metal. It was a breath, slow, steady, alive. Claire froze. Her hand drifted to the stun baton at her belt. No one was supposed to be on board. The auction manifest listed the vessel as empty. Stripped clean by port inspectors, she crept forward, boots silent on the grated floor. In the dim glow of an emergency light, a figure sat cross-legged in the corner of the crew quarters. Tall, slender, with skin that shimmered faintly like moonlight on water. Long silver hair fell over narrow shoulders, and her eyes, wide and luminous, locked onto Claire without fear. She wore a tattered suit of woven fibers that seemed to shift color in the low light, from deep violet to pale blue. Claire's pulse quickened. This was no human. The facial structure was too refined. The ears slightly pointed, the posture unnaturally still. Rumors swirled in the outer colonies about elf-like beings from the Veil Nebula, but most dismissed them as spacer myths. Yet here one sat, calm as if waiting for tea. "Who are you?" she asked, keeping her voice low. The woman did not answer. Instead, she tilted her head, studying Claire with an intensity that felt almost physical. Then, slowly, she rose to her feet. She moved with a grace that defied the cramped space, her bare feet making no sound. She stopped an arm's length away and placed a hand over her own chest. Lyria. The name came out as a whisper, melodic and strange. Not standard galactic, not any dialect Claire knew, but the meaning was clear. Claire nodded. Claire. Lyria's lips curved into the faintest smile. She gestured to the ship around them, then to Claire, then placed her palm flat against the wall. A soft hum filled the room, and for a moment the lights brightened. "You live here?" Claire asked. Lyria nodded once. Then she pointed to Claire, then to the cockpit, then mimed flying. Her meaning was unmistakable. "You are the pilot now." Claire frowned. "Why didn't the Port Authority find you?" Lyria's expression darkened. She made a sharp cutting motion across her throat, then pointed upward, toward the stars. "Danger. Hiding. Understood." Claire relaxed her grip on the baton. She wasn't facing a stowaway. She'd bought a ship with a secret. Over the next few hours, they worked in uneasy silence. Claire checked the power cells while Lyria watched from the doorway. When Claire struggled to access the main console, Lyria stepped forward, pressed 3 fingers to a hidden panel beneath the dash, and the system whirred to life. Screens lit up with streams of alien script. But the navigation interface flickered into a crude approximation of standard galactic. "How did you do that?" Claire asked. Lyria touched her temple, then the console. "Bond." The word sent a chill through Claire. This ship wasn't just a vessel. It was tied to Lyria, maybe even alive in some way. She pushed the thought aside. Superstition wouldn't fix a leaking fuel line. As night fell outside the hangar, Claire sat in the cockpit reviewing the ship's schematics on a cracked datapad. Lyria sat beside her, silent, her presence oddly comforting. Scorvix. That was the name Lyria used when she pointed to the small, curled shape sleeping in a nest of thermal blankets behind the pilot's seat. Snored softly. The creature looked like a dragon from old Earth myths, but no bigger than a house cat, with iridescent scales and wings folded tight against its back. It had blinked open golden eyes when Claire first entered, then purred like a contented feline before drifting off again. Claire had never seen anything like it. Part pet, part guardian, maybe part weapon. Lyria treated it like family. By dawn, Claire had the engines humming at 30% capacity. Not great, but enough to break orbit. She filed a departure request with port control, listed the ship as privately acquired, and received clearance within the hour. As the docking clamps released and the vessel drifted into open space, she felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Then Lyria placed a hand on the console. The ship responded instantly. The engine surged to full power. The navigation screen updated on its own, plotting a course toward the Vega Rim, a restricted zone, littered with debris from the last Great War. Claire grabbed the controls, but the ship ignored her inputs. "What are you doing?" she demanded. Lyria met her gaze, her silver eyes filled with something deeper than fear. Purpose. She pointed to the stars ahead, then to her own heart. Then she placed her hand over Claire's on the throttle. Not my ship anymore, Claire realized. But Lyria shook her head. She tapped Claire's chest, then her own, then the ship's hull. Together, the comms crackled. A distorted voice, metallic and cold, broke through the static. "Unknown vessel. Identify. You are entering monitored space." Lyria's expression hardened. She reached beneath the console and pulled out a slender rod of crystalline material. With a twist, it unfolded into a staff that glowed with soft blue light. She handed it to Claire. "For protection." Claire stared at the weapon, then at the woman who had just handed her a piece of alien tech without hesitation. Trust. Real, unspoken trust. She took the staff. It felt warm in her hands, vibrating faintly as if alive. The ship accelerated, leaving the station far behind. Below them, the planet shrank to a pale blue dot. Ahead, the void stretched endless and dark. But for the first time in years, Claire did not feel alone. Lyria sat back, her posture relaxed, her eyes on the stars. Scorvix uncurled from his nest, stretched his tiny wings, and leapt onto Claire's shoulder. He nuzzled her neck, then let out a soft chirp. Claire smiled. Maybe this ship wasn't junk after all. Maybe it was exactly what she needed, and maybe, just maybe, so was its former owner. The comms remained silent. The stars burned cold and distant. But inside the cockpit, something new had begun. Not just a journey, but a partnership. Unspoken, unexpected, and already unbreakable. Days passed in the quiet rhythm of deep space. Claire and Lyria settled into a fragile routine aboard the ship, which Claire had begun to think of not as scrap, but as something closer to home. The vessel still had no name, but Lyria called it Vera in her soft, melodic tongue, a word that seemed to mean both shield and song. Claire liked that. It felt right. Communication remained a puzzle. Lyria did not speak standard galactic, and Claire knew no words of the astral weaver tongue, yet they understood each other in ways that went beyond language. Lyria would hum a low note when the reactor ran hot, or trace glowing symbols in the air with her fingertips to show Claire which panel needed attention. Claire, in turn, would point to tools, mimic actions, or sketch simple diagrams on a grease-stained notepad. Slowly, a shared vocabulary formed, not of words, but of gestures, expressions, and trust. Scorvix became the bridge between them. The little dragon followed Claire everywhere, perching on her shoulder while she worked, curling around her wrist as she slept. He responded to tone more than command, chirping when happy, hissing softly when something felt wrong. Once, when Claire accidentally overloaded a power conduit, Scorvix let out a sharp trill and blew a tiny puff of flame that melted the faulty fuse before it sparked a fire. Lyria had smiled then, a rare full smile that lit up her whole face. One evening, or what passed for evening in the endless dark, Claire noticed Lyria standing motionless in the cargo hold, her hands pressed against the floor near the rear bulkhead. Her eyes were closed, her breathing slow and deep. Scorvix sat beside her, wings half spread, watching Claire with alert golden eyes. Curious, Claire approached. Lyria opened her eyes and gestured for her to kneel. She tapped the floor 3 times, then made a lifting motion with her palms. Claire frowned, then pressed her own hands to the metal. It felt cold, solid. Nothing unusual, but Lyria was insistent. She knelt beside Claire, placed her hands over Claire's and closed her eyes again. A faint vibration passed through the deck like a heartbeat. Then with a soft click, a hidden seam appeared in the floor. Panels slid apart, revealing a shallow compartment beneath. Inside lay a stasis pod, no larger than a storage crate. Its surface shimmered with the same faint luminescence as Lyria's skin. Tiny veins of light pulsed along its edges. Scorvix crept forward and nuzzled the pod, letting out a low, mournful sound. Claire looked at Lyria. "Is this yours?" Lyria nodded. She placed a hand on the pod and whispered a single word. "Scorvix." Claire blinked. The dragon's name. But the creature was right here, warm and alive on her shoulder. Lyria tapped the pod again, then pointed to the real Scorvix. Same, but young. Understanding dawned. This was not another dragon. This was Scorvix, his original form, preserved in stasis. The small creature Claire knew was a juvenile, a hatchling version grown from a fragment of the original's essence. Lyria had carried him like this for who knew how long, waiting for the right moment to awaken the true Scorvix. But why now? Lyria looked toward the cockpit, toward the stars ahead. Danger near? Need strong? Claire swallowed. The Krelix Dominion. The name had not been spoken, but it hung in the air like smoke. Lyria had shown her fragments of memory. Burning cities, silent skies, machines that devoured organic life. The Dominion did not conquer. They erased. She helped Lyria lift the pod into the main chamber. It was lighter than it looked, humming with stored energy. Lyria placed her palms on either side and began to chant, her voice low and resonant. The light within the pod brightened. Scorvix, the small one, climbed onto Claire's head and watched, utterly still. Then with a hiss of releasing pressure, the pod opened. A wave of warm air rushed out, carrying the scent of ozone and something sweet, like blooming night flowers. Inside lay a creature twice the size of the hatchling, its scales deep crimson with streaks of gold. Its wings were folded tight against its body. Its claws curled gently. Its chest rose and fell in slow, steady breaths. The adult Scorvix opened its eyes. They were the same golden hue as the hatchlings, but deeper, older, filled with ancient knowing. It looked at Lyria first, then at Claire. Then it made a sound, not a growl, not a chirp, but a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the ship's frame. The hatchling leapt from Claire's shoulder and landed on the adult's snout. The two touched noses, and for a moment they seemed to merge. Light flared between them, and then the hatchling dissolved into shimmering motes that flowed into the adult's body. The transformation was complete. Scorvix was whole again. He stretched, unfolding wings that nearly spanned the width of the chamber. Then he turned to Claire and bowed his head just slightly, a gesture of respect, of recognition. Lyria placed a hand on Claire's arm. "He remembers you." Claire reached out, her fingers brushing Scorvix's snout. Warmth spread up her arm, not heat, but something like comfort, like belonging. From that moment on, Scorvix stayed close, not as a pet, but as a guardian. He slept coiled around the engine core at night, his presence stabilizing the ship's power flow. During the day, he perched on the dorsal fin outside the hull, scanning the void with unblinking eyes. When Claire worked on the comms array, he would nudge tools toward her with his snout. When Lyria meditated, he sat beside her, his tail curled protectively around her legs. Then the signal began. It started as a faint pulse in the background noise of the comms, a repeating tone, low and steady like a heartbeat across light years. Claire tried to filter it out, assuming it was interference from a dying satellite or a rogue buoy, but every time she muted it, Scorvix would growl softly and Lyria would shake her head. Not noise. Call. Lyria spent hours at the console, adjusting frequencies, decoding fragments. The signal was encrypted, layered with harmonic patterns that matched the Astral Weaver's light script. Slowly a message emerged, not in words but in images. A star system, a hidden moon, a beacon, the last sanctuary. Claire studied the coordinates. They pointed deep into the Vega Rim, a graveyard of warships and shattered colonies. No sane pilot would go there. The Dominion patrolled the area constantly, but Lyria's eyes burned with determination. "We have to go," she signed, using a gesture they had developed for necessity. Claire hesitated. She had no stake in this war. She was just a mechanic with a lucky bid. But then she looked at Scorvix, watching her with patient eyes, and at Lyria, who had given her a ship, a companion, and something like family. She thought of the auction hall, the loneliness, the endless drift from port to port. This was different. This mattered fine, she said, but we do it smart. They spent the next cycle preparing. Claire rerouted power to the stealth systems, patching gaps in the hull with reflective foil scavenged from emergency blankets. Lyria wove strands of her own hair into the ship's outer skin. A ritual, she explained, that bent light and masked their signature. Skorvik shed a few scales, which Claire embedded into the sensor array to enhance detection range. As they approached the outer edge of the Vega rim, the signal grew stronger. It pulsed through the ship like a second heartbeat. Lyria stood at the viewport, her expression unreadable. Skorvik's lay coiled on the console, eyes half closed but alert. Then alarms blared. 3 Dominion hunter drones dropped out of warp nearby, sleek black triangles with no visible weapons, no markings, just smooth, soulless surfaces that drank the starlight. They moved in perfect formation, scanning the debris field. Claire cut the main engines, switched to battery power, and held her breath. Lyria placed a hand on the hull and whispered a single word. The ship's outer skin rippled, shifting to match the color and texture of the surrounding wreckage. The drones passed within 100 meters. Their sensors swept over the area, paused, then moved on. Claire exhaled. Too close. Lyria nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on the stars ahead. The sanctuary was near, and so was the danger. Skorvix uncoiled and let out a low rumble. Not fear. Readiness. Claire returned to the controls. Her hands were steady now. She wasn't just a passenger in this story anymore. She was part of it. The ship, the elf, the dragon, they were a crew. And crews protected each other. The signal pulsed again, stronger this time. A voice without sound calling them home. They answered. The ship drifted through a field of shattered metal and frozen gas. The remains of 100 warships caught in a single, devastating battle. Twisted hulls floated like bones in the void, some still sparking with dying power cells. Claire kept the engines off, letting momentum carry them deeper into the graveyard. Lyria stood at the forward viewport, her silver eyes scanning the wreckage. Skorvix perched on the dorsal ridge outside, his wings folded tight, his golden gaze fixed on the distance. They were close. The signal had grown from a pulse to a constant hum, vibrating through the ship's frame like a living thing. It came from a cluster of debris near the heart of the field, a tangle of broken cruisers orbiting a dark, silent moon. Claire studied the scans. No energy signatures, no movement, just cold metal and shadow. But Lyria knew better. She placed a hand on the console and closed her eyes. Images flickered across the main screen. Not video, but memories. Flashes of light, soaring towers made of crystal. Beings with luminous skin weaving starlight into shields and sails. The astral weavers. Lyria's people. Then came fire, black ships descending, machines tearing through light and flesh alike, cities falling silent. The weavers vanishing one by one until only Lyria remained. Claire watched, her throat tight. This was not just history. It was grief. Lyria opened her eyes. Last fleet. Here. Claire understood. This graveyard was not random. It was a tomb. The final stand of the astral weavers. She eased the ship between 2 broken hulls, careful to avoid drifting debris. As they passed through the center of the field, Skorvix let out a sharp chirp. His scales flared bright red. Danger. Before Claire could react, the ship shuddered. Hidden panels along the inner walls slid open, revealing dormant systems pulsing with soft blue light. The console lit up with symbols that shifted and flowed like liquid. The ship was waking up. Lyria stepped forward and placed both hands on the main interface. The glyphs responded, swirling around her fingers. She spoke a single word. Vera. And the ship answered with a deep, resonant tone that filled the cabin. This was not a junk hauler. It was Lyria's command vessel, disguised, hidden, waiting. Claire felt a rush of awe. The ship had been protecting its captain all along. And now, surrounded by the bones of her people, Lyria was reclaiming it. Skorvix dropped from the hull and landed beside Lyria, his tail curling around her legs. He looked at Claire and let out a low hum as if to say, "Watch." Lyria turned to Claire. She pressed a hand to her own chest, then to the ship's core. Bond. Then she pointed to Claire. "You too." Claire hesitated. She had fixed engines, rewired circuits, patched hull breaches. But this was different. This was alive. She placed her palm on the console. Warmth spread through her arm. Not electric, but organic, like touching a living tree. Images flooded her mind. Not words, but feelings. Loyalty, sorrow, hope. The ship remembered the war. It remembered the loss. And it remembered Lyria. A new interface bloomed on the screen. Simple, clean, designed for human hands. The ship had adapted for her. "Thank you," Claire whispered. Lyria nodded. Then she pointed ahead, to the dark moon at the center of the debris field, the source of the signal. They moved closer. As they crossed an invisible threshold, the moon's surface shimmered. Not rock, but a shell. A cloaking field. Beneath it lay a structure carved from a single piece of obsidian crystal, shaped like a spiral shell. Lights pulsed within its depths. The sanctuary. But before they could reach it, 3 black shapes dropped from warp above the moon. Hunter-class Dominion drones. Sleek, silent, deadly. Claire's hands flew to the controls. "We can't fight them." Lyria's eyes narrowed. "Not fight, show." She placed her hands on the console and began to weave light with her fingers. The ship responded, its outer skin rippling with patterns of silver and blue. The signal from the sanctuary flared in response. The drones paused. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, one by one, the drones powered down their weapons. Their hulls dimmed. They turned and vanished into the void. Claire stared. "What just happened?" Lyria smiled faintly. "They remember." Fear. The Astral Weavers had not just built shields. They had built legends. The Dominion knew this place, and they feared what slept within. The ship settled onto a smooth landing pad outside the sanctuary. The moment the ramp lowered, Scorvix bounded down, his claws clicking on the crystalline surface. He sniffed the air, then let out a satisfied rumble. Lyria stepped onto the moon, her bare feet touching the ground for the first time in years. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. Home. Claire followed, her boots echoing in the silence. The air was thin but breathable, scented with something like rain and stone. The walls of the sanctuary glowed faintly, reacting to Lyria's presence. Inside, the corridors spiraled downward, lined with murals made of living light, scenes of creation, of harmony, of war. Claire walked slowly, taking it all in. This was not just a hiding place. It was a library, a tomb, a promise. At the center of the sanctuary lay a chamber open to the stars above. In its heart stood a pedestal holding a single object. A shard of pure starlight floating in midair, pulsing gently. Lyria approached it and knelt. She placed her hands on the pedestal and whispered a long, flowing phrase. The shard brightened. Light poured from it, forming a hologram of an elderly weaver, her face lined with wisdom and sorrow. "Daughter, if you see this, we are gone, but the forge remains. Protect it. Awaken it only when hope is not lost." The image faded. Lyria bowed her head. Claire stood behind her, silent. She finally understood. The sanctuary was not just a refuge. It held the last astral forge, the source of the Weaver's power. And Lyria was its last guardian. Scorvix patted over and nudged Lyria's hand. She looked up, her eyes wet with unshed tears. Then she turned to Claire. "You stay?" she asked. Claire thought of the auction hall, the loneliness, the endless drift. She thought of the ship that chose her, the dragon that trusted her, the woman who gave her purpose. "Yes," she said. Lyria rose and placed a hand on Claire's shoulder. Then she pointed to the forge. Together. Outside, the stars burned cold and distant. But here, in the heart of the sanctuary, something ancient stirred. The war was not over, but for the first time in centuries, the light had a chance to return. The peace did not last. 3 cycles after their arrival at the sanctuary, Scorvix woke with a sharp hiss. His scales flared crimson, and his wings snapped open. He leapt onto the observation ledge and stared into the void. Lyria appeared moments later, her silver eyes wide. Claire followed, still pulling on her flight jacket. On the outer sensors, a fleet emerged from warp. Not drones this time. Full Dominion warships, sleek, black, and silent, their hulls shaped like blades. Dozens of them. Converging on the moon. "They found us," Lyria whispered. Claire's stomach dropped. The sanctuary's cloak had held for centuries. Something must have broken it. Maybe the ship's arrival. Maybe the forge's activation. Or maybe the Dominion had simply waited, watching, until the last weaver returned. "We can't stay," she said. Lyria shook her head. "We fight." But how Claire looked at the small sanctuary, the fragile crystal walls. It was never built for battle. Scorvix leapt down and nudged her hand. Then he turned and ran toward the ship. Lyria followed without a word. Inside the cockpit, Lyria placed her hands on the console. The ship responded instantly, systems surging to life. But it was not enough. The vessel was fast, agile, but outgunned. One warship could tear it apart. Dozens would erase it from existence. Claire paced, her mind racing. She was a mechanic, not a soldier. But she knew machines. And she knew this ship better now. Not as scrap, but as a living ally. What if we merge the systems, she asked. Lyria tilted her head. Human tech. Weaver tech. Combine them. Make something new. Lyria's eyes lit with understanding. She placed a hand on Claire's arm. Yes, they worked through the night. Claire tore open access panels, rerouting power from the human-made thrusters into the Weaver light conduits. Lyria wove strands of her own energy into the circuits, her fingers glowing as she shaped the flow. Scorvix stayed close, his body radiating heat that stabilized the overloaded systems. By dawn, or what passed for dawn in the endless dark, the ship was transformed. The hull shimmered with a dual-layer skin, human alloy beneath, Weaver light above. The engines hummed with a new frequency, blending ion thrust with starlight propulsion. The weapons were gone, replaced by resonant emitters that could disrupt machine minds without destruction. It was not a warship, it was something else, something better. As the Dominion fleet closed in, Claire took the pilot's seat. Lyria stood behind her, one hand on the console, the other on Scorvix's head. The dragon's eyes burned gold. They launched just as the first bombardment struck the moon's surface. The sanctuary's cloak shattered. Crystal towers flared bright, then dimmed under the assault. Claire pushed the throttle. The ship shot upward, weaving through debris as energy beams sliced the void around them. Scorvix perched on the dorsal fin, his wings spread, absorbing stray fire with his scales. Lyria chanted softly, her voice weaving with the ship's hum. The emitters charged. Target locked, Claire said. Fire, a pulse of pure resonance erupted from the ship. Not a blast, but a wave. It washed over the nearest warship. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the vessel shuddered. Its lights flickered, its weapons powered down. It drifted, disabled but intact. It worked. Claire breathed. But the Dominion adapted fast. The next wave came with shielded hulls, immune to resonance. They opened fire in unison. The ship rocked violently. Alarms blared. A console exploded in sparks. Lyria cried out as a shard of metal cut her arm. Scorvix roared and unleashed a stream of plasma fire, melting the wing of an approaching fighter. Claire banked hard, diving, toward the ice moon of Neris, a frozen world on the edge of the system. If they could reach its magnetic storms, they might lose the fleet in the interference. Hold on, she shouted. They plunged into the atmosphere, ice crystals scraping the hull. Behind them, the Dominion ships followed, relentless. Inside the cockpit, Lyria slumped against the wall, her blood glowing faintly silver. She was weakening. The bond with the ship was draining her. No, Claire said. You can't. Lyria looked at her, then at Scorvix. She placed a hand on the core. Give. Before Claire could stop her, Lyria pressed both palms to the interface. Light poured from her body into the ship. The engines surged. The hull blazed with silver fire. But Lyria's skin dimmed. Her breath grew shallow. Scorvix leapt to her side, nuzzling her face. He let out a mournful cry, then turned to Claire. His eyes held a command. Finish it. Claire wiped her eyes and gripped the controls. She knew what to do. Using Scorvix's heat and the last of Lyria's energy, she rerouted everything into the main emitter. One shot. All or nothing. She lined up the shot as the Dominion fleet regrouped above the ice clouds. Then she fired. The wave was brighter this time, wider, deeper. It did not just disable machines. It reached into their cores and showed them something they had forgotten. Life. Feeling. Choice. One by one, the warships powered down, not destroyed, Awakened, the fleet turned and vanished into the void. Silence returned. Claire landed the ship on the frozen surface. She rushed to Lyria, who lay pale but breathing. Scorvix curled around her, sharing his warmth. "You did it?" Claire whispered. Lyria opened her eyes and smiled weakly. "We did." Above them the stars burned cold. But the war had changed. Not ended, but changed, and they were still flying. The ship limped through the edge of a dying nebula, its hull scarred, its lights dim. Inside, Claire worked quietly, patching the last of the damaged conduits. Lyria rested in the crew berth, wrapped in thermal cloth, her breathing slow but steady. Scorvix lay coiled around her waist, his scales pulsing with a soft, rhythmic glow, feeding her warmth, sharing his strength. They had survived the ice moon. They had survived the fleet. But the sanctuary was gone, buried under Dominion fire. All that remained was the beacon's final echo, leading them deeper into the nebula. Toward a place marked only as the last light, Claire checked the coordinates again. The signal was stronger now, clearer. Not just a call, but a summons. The forge was there, not hidden, not sleeping, waiting. She glanced back at Lyria. The elf woman's eyes were open, watching the stars through the viewport. She looked tired, but her gaze held purpose. She raised a hand and made the sign they had come to share, forward. Claire nodded. She eased the throttle forward. The ship responded with a low hum, its hybrid engines weaving human thrust with weaver light. They entered the nebula. Swirls of violet and crimson gas wrapped around the hull like ghostly fingers. Sensors flickered, confused by the charged particles. But Scorvix stood on the dorsal ridge, his wings spread, his body acting as a living antenna. He guided them through the storm, his instincts sharper than any machine. After hours of silent travel, the gas parted. Before them floated a massive asteroid, its surface covered in crystalline spires that pulsed with inner light. It was not natural. It had been shaped, carved by hands that understood both stone and starlight. This was the true sanctuary, the heart of the Astral Weaver's legacy. Claire brought the ship to a gentle stop at the main docking spire. No alarms, no defenses, just silence and the steady beat of the forge's signal. Lyria rose slowly, leaning on Scorvix for support. She walked to the ramp, her bare feet touching the crystalline floor. The moment she stepped onto the asteroid, the spires brightened. Light flowed from her feet outward, awakening the entire structure. Claire followed, her boots clicking softly. The air here was warm, alive. The walls hummed with stored energy. And at the center of it all, in a wide-open chamber open to the nebula above, stood the forge. It was not fire and metal. It was pure light, woven into a sphere that floated above a pedestal of black stone. Threads of starlight spiraled around it, humming with ancient power. Lyria approached it, her steps slow but sure. She placed her hands on the pedestal and closed her eyes. The forge responded, expanding its glow to envelop her. Memories poured out, not just hers but those of her people. Songs of creation, warnings of war, hopes for peace. Claire watched awed. This was not just a weapon. It was a library, a soul. Then the sky darkened. Dozens of Dominion ships dropped from warp surrounding the asteroid. Not drones, not scouts, the core fleet. The command vessels. Black as void, silent as death. They had followed the signal. They had come to end it all. Lyria opened her eyes. Her voice was weak but clear. "Protect the forge." Claire ran back to the ship. Scorvix leapt onto her shoulder, his scales burning hot. She powered up the systems, her hands moving fast. The ship was damaged, but it would fly. It had to. As the first energy beams lanced toward the asteroid, Scorvix launched himself into the sky. He was small against the warships, but his fire was not ordinary flame. It was condensed starlight, forged in the heart of a dying sun. His breath struck the lead vessel, not melting it, but unraveling its machine mind, turning its logic into chaos. Claire took to the skies, weaving between beams, drawing fire away from the forge. She fired the resonant emitters, but the Dominion had adapted. Their shields held. Below Lyria began the ritual. She stepped into the center of the forge chamber, arms raised. Light poured from her body, feeding the sphere. The spires around the asteroid flared bright, forming a shield of woven starlight. But it would not hold forever. She was still weak, still healing. Claire saw it. She knew what had to be done. Scorvix returned, scorched but unbroken. He landed on the ship's nose and looked at Claire. His eyes held no fear, only trust. She made her choice. Diving low, she flew straight toward the forge chamber. Scorvix leapt off the hull and landed beside Lyria. The dragon turned and opened his jaws wide, not to breathe fire, but to receive. Lyria placed her hands on Scorvix's head. The forge poured its energy into him. His body blazed like a newborn star, wings spread, scales blazing gold and white. He rose into the sky, not as a creature but as a vessel. Claire hovered nearby, watching in awe. Scorvix unleashed the wave. It was not sound, not light. It was understanding. It washed over the Dominion fleet not as an attack but as a question. Do you remember what you were before the machines took you one by one? The warships faltered. Their black hulls softened. Their weapons powered down. Some turned away. Others drifted, their systems rebooting into something new, something free. The Dominion did not retreat in fear. They left in silence. Changed. On the asteroid, Lyria collapsed. Scorvix landed beside her, his light dimming to a gentle glow. Claire rushed to them, dropping to her knees. You did it, she said. Lyria smiled. We did. The forge pulsed softly, its work done. The sanctuary was safe. The light would spread. Claire looked at the stars, then at the two beings beside her. She had come here looking for a ship. She had found a home. She stayed, not as a pilot, not as an owner, but as a partner. The ship, the elf, the dragon, they were one. And their story was just beginning.